Hello, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today for Future in Focus. Today, you're going to learn a lot from industry experts in nonprofit, and we're going to structure the day as a couple of workshops at the beginning. So there will be a 2-hour live workshop. There will then be lunch break. After that, we have a 1-hour session with a real nonprofit CFO. And then we round out the day with our breakout tracks. If you're here for CPE credit, make sure that you respond to all of the polling questions in all of the sessions. Make sure that you complete the survey at the end of the event, and that will be accessed via Velixo Academy. You'll be sent a link to complete that survey. And most importantly, make sure that you attend the entire event if you're here for CPE. So starting from this moment forward through the end of the day, which ends at 4 p.m. Eastern. Without any further ado, I want to start off our program, and I won't steal too much of his intro, but we have Carl Seidman here today to do a 2-hour live Excel workshop. Carl is one of 35 Microsoft MVPs based in the US, and his content is really amazing, and we're lucky to have him with us today. So, Carl, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, everyone, for being here. As Jim mentioned, this is going to be a pretty hands-on workshop. We've got 2 hours together, and I recognize many of your names, so I thank those of you who I recognize for being here, and those of you I've never crossed paths with before, welcome. You're in for a treat. Those of you who have come through any sessions of mine before, you know that this is all implementation ready, highly applicable techniques and methods that I use with my clients and that also as a Microsoft MVP. I'm very much in the know of what kinds of new techniques and new releases that the Excel product team is working on. So, coming from a finance and accounting background, very similar to many of you, you're going to be in for a real highly valuable and highly applicable session today. So, without any further delay, what we're going to be talking about is dynamic Excel techniques that every FP&A, financial planning and analysis professional should know. Now, if you come from a deep Excel background, there are going to be some techniques that you've never seen before. And if you come from more of a foundational Excel background, there's going to be a whole lot of different techniques and approaches that I'm going to share with you today. So, without any further delay, what I'm going to share with you is today's session is going to be not just about Excel commands or functions or formulas, it's going to be higher level than that. It's going to be about different ways that you can go about thinking about the structure of your workbooks so that the structure and connections within Excel allow you to save time, eliminate mistakes, reduce your rework, and then also significantly limit redoing the same kind of analysis or roll forwards every single week or every month. As I had mentioned, I'm going to share with you functions that you've probably never seen before, whether you come from a foundational Excel or financial background, or you've been doing this for 30 years. I'll also share with you a number of different use cases, including in not for profit, and then finally, as Jim had mentioned, I'm strongly going to encourage you to stay till the end, because not only are you going to get your CPE credits, but I'm also going to give two giveaways that I almost never give away to groups like this. So whether you're watching this live or whether you're watching this on the recording, you're definitely going to want to stay to the end because I'm going to give something away to you. As Jim had mentioned, Carl Seidman, based outside of the Chicagoland area. I'm one of approximately 35 Microsoft MVPs, most valuable professionals, in Excel, based in the US. I'm principal of Seidman Financial, where almost all of my focus these days is on professional education, professional development, training, and then the development of FP&A teams within small entrepreneurial businesses, mid-market companies, and even Fortune 1000 corporations. And then finally, I'm also a professor in data analytics at the Jones Graduate School of Business at Rice University. Okay, now before we get started into the content, I'm going to suggest that we do a little bit of a poll here. And you're welcome to submit this into the poll. You're welcome to put this into the chat window. But my question to you is, how would you describe your current process for getting financial data from your accounting system into Excel for reporting and forecasting? And I'll wait a little bit of time for the responses to come in. And as I would expect, we're seeing responses across All four fully automated. Data flows directly into my models, real time or on a schedule. Semi-automated, some connections, but I still do significant manual cleanup. Mostly manual. I export files and paste or reformat data each period. And then fourth, fully manual. Everything is rekeyed, copy, pasted from reports. Let's take a few more seconds. And as I would expect, I am seeing that most of the responses are either mostly manual or semi-automated. Let's just wait a few more seconds for everyone else to submit. Very, very few fully automated and very few fully manual. So again, somewhere in the middle. Okay, well, let's close up the poll. And if I may, I'm going to give you a little bit of background and context in terms of who we're going to be following along with in today's session. And to make this a little bit more relevant to this audience and not for profit, is we're going to follow a company that I have named fictionally Riverbend Youth Alliance. It's a mid-sized 501c3 organization serving young adults across Cleveland and Detroit. Now, some of you who I recognize your names, you may know that I'm actually from outside of Detroit. So you're going to see some detail within the data that we have here that if you are in the city of Detroit or if you're in the city of Cleveland, you may actually recognize some of these. But again, it's totally fictional. A lot of the data is completely made up. We've got a company with a $12 million operating budget. Obviously, these two entities. We've got 5 funds, 3 programs, and then we have an audit. Now, what we're going to be doing is going through 3 primary different models. Okay, one is going to be a little bit more on the data side of when we get data in, either from a system or manually bringing it. As many of you have shared in the poll, many of you are doing this either semi-automated or mostly manual, right? So I'm going to share with you different ways that you can make it more automated, more seamless, more standardized, so that next month and next quarter, you're able to bring this data in quite literally at the click of a button with a high level of confidence and a reduced level of uncertainty that your data is not going to come in the right way. Okay? Now, again, before we start getting into this entire masterclass, I want to do just one more survey, one more poll, and then I promise you that for an extended period of time, we're going to roll up our sleeves, we're going to get into the files. So the next polling question I want to ask of you is, what financial system or ERP does your organization currently use as its primary accounting and reporting platform? And as you are submitting your results, results being Sage Intacct, Acumatica, Microsoft Dynamics 365 Business Central, or something else like NetSuite or QuickBooks, SAP, Oracle, or maybe something that most of us are not familiar with. And while you're entering your prompts into or your responses into the poll, I'm going to share with you that once we get into Excel, we're going to see that once the data's here, this is where we're going to be playing with it. This is where we're going to forecast and analyze and work with a lot of dynamic functionality. But all dependent on where this data is coming in, we got to make sure that it is sanitized and positioned and ready to go. All right, I'm going to give you a little bit more time. Looks like we've got a real spread. So about so far 28% on Sage Intacct, almost 40% on Acumatica, 2% on Dynamics 365 Business Central, and then about a third or so on something else. I'm going to give you another, let's say, 20 seconds or so, and then we'll wrap up this poll and then we'll share the results. Okay. So again, an interesting split. It's about a third, a third, a third across Sage Intacct, Acumatica, and something else, with a small number of people with Microsoft Dynamics 365 Business Central. All right. Well, thank you for participating in these polls. It gives me an idea in terms of where everyone is coming from. I'm going to stop sharing. Let's actually share these results. And then again, we'll stop sharing and we'll close up this poll. Now, one key point that I'm going to bring you into before we start going into the model is what is dynamic modeling in Excel? That's a lot of what this session is going to be all about. Now, a static model, which many of you are probably very familiar with, whether it's you yourself doing it or among your team and your colleagues, is it's a model that's kind of like a snapshot, right? You build it in Excel, you build it in Google Sheets, whatever your platform is, but it's largely frozen. It's largely stuck at a point in time. And as many of you had highlighted in my first poll, is a large number of you are either doing semi-manual, semi-automated, or largely manual data updates. And once it gets into Excel, my guess is that most of you, not just many, but most of you would say, yeah, most of what we're doing is static. It's not very dynamic. And so the piece that I add down here in the bottom is that a dynamic model is different than a static one. They look the same aesthetically, but a dynamic model is one that recalculates. It's almost automatic as you make changes to your inputs because the guts of the model is almost entirely formulaic. And that's what we're going to be covering for these next couple of hours. So let's dive in. The first file that I'm going to take you through is going to introduce us again to Riverbend Youth Alliance. And you're going to see that in many of my models, I will start off with an intro or a readme or a narrative. Why do I do this? And what I'm actually going to ask all of you to do, if you are able, is if you can put into the chat window or if you can put into the Q&A, feel free to put into the chat window, why do you think I would put a readme in the front of a dynamic model? Again, why would I put a readme at the front of the model? All right. So some people are saying no idea, right? So part of the reason, oh, I see some coming in. Okay. So a cover page, a reminder not to break the model. Don't know. Explain what to do to give any other user important information about the model. You bet. So to credit Christina and to Tracy and to Rebecca who are chatting in, is if I build a dynamic model and I pass this off to you, you might say, I have no idea what's in here. I have no idea what it does. And then maybe within the first few minutes of going through, you say, I'm not sure where the data is input. I don't know where the dynamics are located. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do here. So even though in this exercise file, which I'll call it here, I'm keeping this fairly simple, this is my opportunity to put it in front of you, to resonate with you, to build confidence so that you know what is to follow. Okay, so let's come over here to the GL export. Again, based upon what many of you had put into the first poll, as many of you are bringing your data in either semi-manual, totally manual, or semi-automated. Now, what we can see here is data that has come into Excel. We don't know whether this is automated or whether we copied and pasted this in. Now, again, many of you who are in this program, I recognize your names. You've been with me in programs before, and you're going to be very, very familiar with one of the very first techniques that I introduce you to. If I were to come over here and I just go equals sum, and I come over here to my amounts and I go all the way down, super easy, right? So we've got amounts across the entire GL. By the way, this number doesn't make any sense because I'm summing every value in the GL, right? These are not financials. But we've got 25,756. If we take a look at my formula, we have an issue here, right? It goes from F2 all the way down to F1280. Now, right now, that's not a problem. But remember what I had said about static modeling, right? So static modeling means it's at a frozen point in time. If I start adding in additional data for my GL, this number is not going to update. It's going to go down to 1280. It's not going to come down here to 1288. Now, some of you are going to push back on me and say, well, Carl, this is easy. All I have to do is go F to F, right? And as you can see here, it gives me the exact same number. And if I were to scroll all the way down to the bottom and I start putting in additional data here at, again, 1288, not a problem. I've captured the entirety of column F. But many of you are already thinking ahead. You say, well, hold on a second. He's also capturing every single cell in all of column F. I want you to think about how many cells are in a single column. It's over 1,048,000. So very quickly, we can take a very small, tight data set and make it very large, very complicated, very burdened. And as many of you would probably acknowledge, as you start building a bigger and bigger and bigger model with more data, more formulas, more connections, your model will start to get clunky. Okay? So, what do we do? What I'm going to introduce you to first, one of the most foundational, easiest to implement, yet extremely important techniques, is this Control Shift Spacebar to select the entirety of my data. I'm going to come up here to Insert and right here to Table. Many of you have probably seen this before. This has been around for years. But I can share with you, as a Microsoft insider, that Microsoft continues to invest additional functionality in what these tables can do. So let's take a look. If I select table, this window pops up. It says, where is the data for your table? A1 to F1280. Wonderful. That's the entire data set. In addition, super important here, my data has headers. If I click this and click OK, now let's take a look at what is here. If I click on the table, you'll note that table design, this ribbon appears. If I click off, table design goes away. Let's click back on. When I go to table design, I'm actually going to come over here and clean this up a little bit, change the color so it's easier for us to see. Now, up in the top left, you can see that I have table name. Right now it says table 7. Well, why does it say table 7? Why doesn't it say table 1? Because most likely, one of two things has happened in this file. One is I already have table 1, table 2, table 3, table 4, table 5, table 6, and sequentially it's adding in a seventh table. Also, if I have inserted tables before this one and then deleted it out, what's happening is just, again, sequentially adding in additional table numbers. Okay? But here's the problem. Is it a good idea to leave something named as table 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7? No way. So I'm going to go T, B, L, and then what I'll do here easily is I'll just call this data all. And I'll hit enter. Okay, now it doesn't look like anything happened, but when I click away and I click back, now you can see table design, table data all. Wonderful. If I come over here to the right and I go equals TBL, here is one of the first techniques that I'm going to really encourage you to adopt. When we add TBL as the notation in front of named and captured data sets, you can now see that I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 data tables within this file. And if I can't remember what this table was called, all I have to do is type in TBL and it will give me all of these lists. Okay, now we called it TBL data all. I'm going to hit tab. Now, if I were to hit enter, you can already see that TBL data all is highlighting this completely in blue. If I were to hit enter, it's going to show all of this data, which means I can now call on this data using VLOOKUP, HLOOKUP, XLOOKUP, index match, SUMIF, all kinds of functionality, all by just calling on TBL data all. Let's take one step back. I'm going to go equals TBL data all, open bracket. Okay, now this is where a lot of the magic really happens. Here you can see trans date, journal entry number, account, description, name, amount. What are all of these? As you can see in row number 1, trans date, journal entry number, account description, name, and amount. So this is why when I declared this as a dynamic table, it was imperative for me to click that checkbox and say, my data has headers. Now I get to call on it. But before I do this, I want to introduce you to these 4. Most people have no idea that this is even possible. If I go pound all, it's going to refer to the entire collective of the table. If I go to pound data, it's going to be all of the data excluding the headers. If I go to headers, it's taking the headers, excluding the data. And then finally, down at the very bottom, I don't have it in this data set right now, but at the very bottom of my data set, I could add a dynamic total. So that if Jim were to add in a new month of data, a new GL, new figures here, that dynamic table will move down, that dynamic total will move down, and I can refer to it anytime, anywhere that I want. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go amount, tab, close the bracket. When I do, you can see that that entire amount gets highlighted in blue. If I were to hit enter, there's all of my data. Wonderful. But that's not it. If I go equals sum and I put my parentheses and I close it, presto. There we go. It's the exact same number. When I come over here, you can see this is all of column F, 1,048,000 rows. When I come over here, it's saying, no, let me just grab all of the values from the top of the range to the bottom of the range, as far as that table goes. But what's also really interesting is you see no cell references. So if I were to move this table to the right, if I were to move it down, if I were to refer to this on a completely different page, you're going to note that it's always going to know what that table is. It's always going to know which column amounts fall in, and it's going to grab the sum. Okay, now as Jim is pointing out into the Q&A, please, as you have questions, pop them in here. I'm going to be keeping my eye on the screen, and I'm going to stop every so often, take a look at what questions are coming in. And again, this is a choose your own adventure. I have the curriculum, but as you have questions, I'm going to redirect and make sure that we answer those. Okay, now let's come over here to the GL table. Looks very similar to what I just showed on the other page. But as you're going to note, if I scroll all the way down to the bottom and then all the way over here to the right, you can see that I have this little wedge. Those of you who I recognize here, you know this because you've come through my sessions. This is what I call the data wedge. This is the bottom rightmost part of a dynamic table. So anything that's down here, anything that's over here is not going to get captured by the name TBLGL. That's the name of this table. But anything that is within these bounds will. Now let's bring this into real life application. Let's take a look at this. So if we have our company, right, Riverbend Youth Alliance, we have all of these transaction dates, journal entries, accounts, descriptions of the transaction, who this is to, customer or vendor, and then the amount. I'm going to bring your attention right here. If you would, and I know we're having a little bit of a challenge in the chat window, so feel free to put this into the Q&A window. What is this showing us, and what's the problem with this account notation? I guess some of you have probably seen this in your accounting systems. What is this doing? But what's the problem? We have 01 or 02 dash, a three-digit number, a code, and then another code. So Sam says mixes text and numbers. Charles says it's a concatenation. Christina says ledger account, but it's a mix of numbers and text. Richard says it begins with the number. Joanne says it's concatenated, so we have issues sorting. Lorraine absolutely says difficult for non-accountants. If you take a look over here to the right, we have accounts, entity codes, fund codes, program codes, GL codes, GL account codes. And most likely it's all being baked into this one column. So if we have a backend system that does this, that's consolidating or concatenating everything all together, wonderful. We get to put it all into one column. But the problem is we don't know what entity this is. We don't know what fund this is. We don't know what program this is, and so on. So for this next exercise, what we're going to do is I'm going to introduce to you dynamic functionality within Excel that's going to allow us to parse all of this information out. Okay. The goal that we're going to have is to separate the 0, 1, the 100, the FNDRS, the 4400. Okay? And I'm going to put those over here. But before I do this, I also want to show you what our ultimate destination is going to look like. Let's come over here to mappings. In most of my models, again, many of you have been through my programs before. You've seen me do this again and again. I almost always include a worksheet or a tab that I name mapping. Here you can see code 0102, Riverbend, Cleveland, Riverbend, Detroit. Let's come back over here for a moment. 01, 02, 01, 02, 01, 02. So you can see that this first element of the account number corresponds to entities. Funds, I have one, two, three, four, five. So I have my unrestricted fund, my workforce innovation grant, state workforce development, Hartman Family Foundation, Cleveland Community Foundation. We've got five of them, three-digit numbers. What do you see right here? Here are my three-digit numbers. I have my five-letter codes. When I come back over here, here are my five-letter codes for programs: mentoring, workforce readiness, internship placement, management and general and fundraising. And then finally, we have our four-digit GL codes. Four-digit GL codes. If I can ask you, and again, put this into the Q&A just so we can interact with each other. Why do I have this mapping here? What's this going to allow me to do in Excel that I don't necessarily have to do on the back end? Why have I teed it up this way? And as you're answering, I'm going to actually answer Jade's question. Jade asked, what happens if you have multiple tables in the same tab? No problem. As you can see here, I have multiple tables in the same tab, right? The one problem that I believe exists is that if we were to add on, let's say, one, two, three, four new funds, this table would crash down into this table. No problem, because remember, I can insert, and the name of this table is exactly the same as it was. Tables are objects, they're not cell references. Okay, let's put this back. Let me take a look at the responses. So Angeline says you can pull in descriptions. Tracy says pull areas together. Margot says to be able to easily filter. Renee says to create lookup functions. Yes, 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 yes to everybody who's answering. So if I were to come over here to GL table, I want to be able to say, all right, let us extract the individual numbers. But then over here to the right, I want to be able to grab the entity name based upon the entity code. I want the fund name based upon the fund code. Okay, so let's do this. I'm going to take this over here to the GL parsed. And before we do anything, I'm actually going to come up here and let's get rid of some of these values. Let's start very, very simple. I'm going to put my cursor here. I'm going to go to data. Let's get rid of our filtering and let's just focus here on account clean. How many of you, again, put it into the Q&A, how many of you have ever had perfectly clean data? No formatting issues, no spaces, no hyphens. Everything is exactly the way you want it to be. Jenna says never. Tamara says rarely. Tracy says never. Angeline says never. Dana says never. Salome says never. Salome, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Dean says very funny. Vanessa says never. Kelsey says almost never. I think all of you get the point, right? It almost never happens. What I've done here is I have had a little bit of fun. Is I've highlighted this, and you can see that I have a space in the front of my data. You'll also see that for my program ID, it's FNDRS, but it's lowercase and uppercase, right? And some of you are probably smiling. I can't see you right here. You're like, oh, this happens to me all the time. I have a space in the front, I have a space in the back. Things are not capitalized the way that I want it to be. All right. Now, in addition, let me put the filter back. I'm going to come over here. Let's go sort by filter. I've got a couple of other issues. Okay, now I'm going to ask you, put it into your chat window. What is wrong with these two as you compare to these? Okay, so I'm going to bring your attention just to this. Becca says it is missing a leading zero, right? Kelsey says it's dropping the zero. Many of you are saying it's dropping the zero. Does this happen to any of you? Probably all of the time. It just depends on how your data is formatted. How is it coming in from the system? All right. So let's get rid of the filter. Oops, let's put the filter back. Let's get rid of the sort. Let's go select all. Let's not sort by color. Get rid of that. And then let's unfilter. Okay, now what I want to be able to do here is I want to fix this, and I want to be able to do this dynamically. Allow me to bring you to one of the easiest, cleanest, and most rewarding combinations of functions we can have. Trim upper. What does trim do? What trim does is it removes the leading and lagging spaces. So if you ever deal with what I'm sharing here of I've got extra data in front. I've got extra spaces in the back. I want to clean this thing up. Just put trim and you are good to go. What does upper do? You would probably guess correctly, is it takes all lowercase alphanumeric characters and makes them all uppercase. Is there a lower? Yes, there is. If I have all uppercase and I want to make it lower, put in the lower command. And then some of you might say, well, what if I have names? What if I have cities? Could I do a proper? Yes, I could. Use the proper command. All right, now, before I do anything, oops, it did what I didn't want it to do. You're probably taking a look right here. Many of you probably never seen this before, this at sign. What does it do? This actually came out back in 2020. Some of you probably opened up some files one day after Microsoft pushed a big update and you notice these at signs all over the place. You say, what is it doing? Well, the at sign says, let's do this on the current row exactly where I am. Bracket account. We just talked about this about 10 minutes ago. Account is right here in column C, but it's not really column C, it's the third column within this dynamic data table. Which means, again, if I push this to the right, if I push this down, even if I rearrange and I put account over here and name over here, no problem. Excel knows exactly where this is. If I get rid of that at, take a look at what it's done. Again, this is reinforcement of what I shared with you before is it's giving me a listing of all of my column headers. I can choose any one that I want. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to click enter. Now, what did this do? Take a look. What this is doing, oops, let's get rid of that. No, I guess that's working the way that we want. If we come over here, it's saying, okay, well, I have every single one of these, and it's making them, it's getting rid of all of these spaces before and after, and it's also making all of this uppercase. But take a look at the formula. This is our first major dynamic formula. Is it's the same one every single step of the way at this row, at this row, at this row, at this row. So all you need to do, everyone, is put the right formula in one time and it spills. Spill is going to be one of the key methods that we're going to be talking about throughout the duration of our time together. Okay, as you have questions, please put them into the chat window. Okay, let's come over here to entity code. This one is a little bit more challenging, but I promise you, we're going to go through it one step at a time. Okay, let's begin with the inner parts. Okay, so when I'm in Excel and I say, whoa, I've got 4 different commands here, this looks confusing, I almost always start with the inside. Text split at account clean. At account clean means this row, account clean is the column we were just in. What text split does is it's going to say, let's take a look at what text and then delimiter. What is a delimiter? What it's looking for is a dash or a space or a hash or an underscore. I'm putting right here a dash, right? So it's saying, let's take a look here, find the dash, and find this in this one row. Okay, so it's saying, let's come over here, let's find it in this one row. Now, value is saying, now let's take a look at this value, and then how do I want to format it? As you can see at the very end, I'm making it a format of text in the format quote 00. Before I hit enter, what do you think this is going to do? If account clean was making an uppercase and getting rid of the trimming, the spaces on the front and the back. But this one is saying, let's identify the dash. Let's split it. Let's make it in the format of 00. What's it going to do? There we go. So even though it looks like it's going to put a bunch of zeros, this format within Excel says, no, I actually want two numerical places. And if it is just a number, I want to put a zero in front of it. Okay? So as you can see, the problem that we had with these two over here of the 2, the 1, instead of the 02, the 01, we now have the format that we want. That's your text split, your value, and your text. And of course, as I scroll down, same formula every single step of the way. This is a dynamic spill. Okay. Jared asked the question one more time. What does that at sign do? Jared, the at sign is saying perform this calculation on this row. Okay? So it's saying take a look at the account clean column, but it's saying do it in this row. And then do it in this row. And then in this row. And then in this row. Okay? Fatima asked the question, what does index do? So index allows me to say, let's take a look at a range of data or an array. It's going to then say, let's take a look at a row and then potentially a column if I had a column. So we wanted to be taking a look at this row. Okay, we're going to be seeing more array and more data range calculations later on. All right, fund code. Let's take a look at this one. So this should look pretty familiar to you, right? Text split, account clean. So what this is doing is it's saying, let us take a look again at this column. Let's look at the delimiter of the dash. But this is where things get a little bit interesting. Fatima just asked the question of what does index do? Well, if I come over here and I say, all right, I actually want to go one more space, right? One more dash. If I hit enter, look at what happens. Instead of it looking at the first dash, it's looking at the second dash, right? So now it's extracting the 100, the 200, the 220, the 100. What's the at sign doing? That row, that row, that row, that row. The 2 within the index is saying find the second dash and slice it out, split it out there. As again, you're going to get a little tired of me saying it, this is another dynamic spill. As long as I build the formula correct the first time, spill, spill, spill every single step of the way, all the way down to the bottom of my data set. All right, so I'm going to continue to go through the chat window. So Ann Lee asked the question, can you use the formula left to or mid numbers or right for to separate the account? And yes, and be careful. So Ann asked a question, can I use the left function or the right function or the mid function? All of these exist within Excel. Yes, you can. But where you need to be very, very, very careful is if I were to say left 2. If I did left 2, I would get these two values. But if I did left 2 here, I would get a 2 and then a dash. So, Anne, you're partially correct of saying, well, if we've got really, really consistent data, which 99.9% of you said I never end up with, rarely end up with consistent data, you're going to end up with some problems. Text split, as we've done here, And as we've done here, and as we're going to do here, and as we're going to do here, you can see that I am breaking it apart based upon the delimiter segmentation. Okay, we got two more to go. And my guess is having gone through these two already, you probably already understand what's going to happen here. Okay, so again, text split, account clean. We were already right here. Split it at the dash. Which one? The third one, right? So it's saying, all right, not here, not here. Let's take a look right here. Let's grab all of this. Boom. There you go, right? And again, I'm gonna if everybody was audible, I would say, what is this? And all of you would say, this is a dynamic spill, okay? From the top all the way to the bottom as far as this data goes. Let's do one more for good measure. Same exact function. Text split, account clean, taking a look right here. Delimiter is the dash. We want the fourth one. Grab all of that data. Let's hit enter. Boom, there you go. Let's bring this full circle. What do we have? We've got data that's coming in from a back-end accounting system. It's nice, it's great, but it's not exactly the way we want it to be because it's concatenating or consolidating all of the different elements into one cell or into one column. What I want to be able to do is to be able to break all four of these apart because I need to be able to slice and filter by entity name, by fund name, by restriction, program name, functional category, and beyond. Okay. I'm going to go back to the chat window. Let's see. Okay, Zyrene says, what makes it spill to the lower rows? It's a great question. It's not magic, it's the way that dynamic arrays and dynamic tables work. Okay, so when you use dynamic functionality within dynamic elements like a table here, it automatically spills. And as you can, some of you are probably already seeing this over here, we have dynamic lists. So we're going to be using dynamic commands to make dynamic lists out of our dynamic table. All right. Let's see what else. Daniel asked the question, how do you fix the missing leading zeros? Again, we talked about that a little bit before. Over here, this was essentially saying I want, oh, I'm sorry, the leading zeros. Yes, the leading zeros over here is I was saying let's split this and let's make sure that we use the format 00. What this is always going to do is it's going to say I must make sure that my numerical format has two digits. If it has two digits, display the two digits. If it has one digit, display that one digit with a 0. That's how we fix this problem. Jason asked the question. Hope we get to lambda to re-formulas like this elsewhere. So we're going to be talking about lambdas a little bit down the road. Kenneth asked the question, please show the formula in column H and column I. All right, so if we come over here to column H and column I is very simple, very similar to what we see in I, J, and K. Take a look. The only difference is dash 2, dash 3, dash 4. If I come over here, this is dash 1. Okay? So I'm segmenting every single step of the way. And the reason why this is a little bit more complicated is I'm putting the double zeros in the front, or the double numerics. Okay. Now, let's come back over here. This is where a lot of the more relevant lookups, a lot more of the more relevant reporting comes into play, especially in our world of accounting and finance, right? So, if I can ask you, type into the Q&A, how many of you are familiar with XLOOKUP in contrast to VLOOKUP or HLOOKUP? Just type in a yes or no. Okay, I see. Yes, 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 yes. Okay, so this looks like it's going to be a review for many of you, probably most of you. But for those of you who are not familiar with it, I'm going to give you a really basic overview. XLOOKUP does what VLOOKUP and HLOOKUP do, but is far more effective and efficient. Here you can see we have a lookup value. We want to look it up within an array where we will find that value. And then we want to return the adjacent value somewhere else. Okay? Now, as you can see here, I've got a bunch of bracketed terms, and what brackets usually mean are they're either optional or they default to, something that's quite basic. In this case, an XLOOKUP with none of these optionals are going to be, if it's not found, just give me an error. Match mode, I want it to be exact. Search mode, start from the beginning, go to the end. Let's take a look at each one of these pieces. At entity code. By now, most of you should be very aware of what the at sign does. It's this row, this row, this row. Entity code. Where do we see this? Everyone, dynamic table means up at the top in bracketed terms, I've got bracketed headers. Well, amazingly, I didn't have these values until what, 15 minutes ago? So, because I was thoughtful and I built this to be dynamic, now I get to refer to all of these formulas that dynamically spilled underneath. All right. So it's going to say, let's look up 01, 02, 01, 01, 02, etc. Where is it going to look it up? TBL entities brackets code. All right. We've got a little bit of a challenge here. You know the name of this table. You know the name of the GL export table, but you have never seen TBL entities. How can we find out what TBL entities is? If I come up here to my formulas and I come right in here to this big icon that says name manager and I open this up, TBL entities is located right here. Okay. Now there's a reason why, again, I put TBL, TBL, TBL to notate these tables. Because if I click over here, I click over here, I click over here, it's sorting by these individual columns. But if I select name, it sorts all of this alphabetically, and I can say TBL A, TBL D, TBL E. It's right here. It's on the mapping worksheet, and specifically, it is at mappings B6 to C7. Let's go take a look. Mappings B6 to C7. When I highlight it, take a look at what appears here in my name box. TBL entities. Code, entity name. Let's come back. Take a look at this code within the entities code and then bring back the entity name. What's going to happen when I hit enter? Dynamic spill. Remember, when we do these formulas, these dynamic formulas referring to dynamic tables within dynamic tables, all we have to do is build the formula correct the first time and it spills all the way down. And the next month and the next month that Caleb and Jade bring in new data, don't worry about it. All these formulas will automatically go down as well. Okay, let me come back into the Q&A. Molly asked the question, why do you only have to add the value formula for the clean account column and no others? Okay, well, let's take a step back. If I come over here to value, remember, Molly, I have this right here and this right here. These are not formatted values correctly. So I'm using the value function to format these numbers the way that they need to be formatted. The good news is this, all of these are already formatted the right way. So it makes it congruent with the way that value is. When I come over here, no problem. It's already set up. 3-digit code, 5-letter program, 4-digit GL account. So I'm using value to get the format the way that I want. These are already formatted the way that I need them to be. Let's do another couple of questions. So Jade asked a question. You mentioned the data is not consistent. What happens if the data is inconsistent in the middle rather than at the beginning and the trim captures that inconsistent data? Okay, so maybe to combine Jade's question and Molly's question is I'm making the assumption right now that I have this formatted the right way. Okay? So this is saying grab everything basically up until that third dash. But if it's not in the right format, I might need to use the value or the text function, like I've done here, to set this up to be the right way. 5 characters, 6 numbers, 2 numbers dash 3 numbers. Okay? So we've got to be thoughtful of what our data looks like. All right, let's keep going, and then I'll come back into the Q&A and take a look. All right, good news, everyone. if we take a look at this formula, it looks very similar to this formula. Looks very similar to this formula. Looks very similar to this one and this one and so on. But as you can see, this first one is saying, let's take a look at TBL entities, TBL funds, TBL funds, TBL programs, TBL programs, TBL accounts, TBL accounts. So, everyone, I hope that you're thinking in advance and saying, well, if I were to get this master data dump, this is what I want to be working with in my company. But if I didn't build my mappings in advance, I wouldn't be able to do a whole lot of this. So, in FP&A, in my world, financial planning and analysis and strategic finance, I'm often trying to think it's not just how do I do something in Excel, it's what is my end to end process? What system or systems am I using on the back end? How do I get that data from the back end into Excel in the format that I want it to be in? And then once it's here, how do I play with it? How do I massage it? How do I interact with it in a way that is going to be most useful, but also most repeatable, most seamless, least error prone? And that's why I almost always set these mappings up before I even start getting into my data. All right, watch how easy this is. I'm going to come over here. I'm going to hit enter, spill. I'm going to come over here, enter, spill. I'm going to hit enter, spill. I'm going to come over here, enter, spill. I'm going to come over here, enter, spill. I'm going to come over here, enter, done. I hope you're seeing how easy this is when you build your formulas consistent from one to the next, to the next, to the next, and so on. Dynamic functionality of an X lookup within dynamic functionality of a data table, you can do this in 10 seconds. Okay, let's come back over here. Caleb asked the question, why not just use index match instead? Oh, I'm sorry, that's from a while ago. Let's see. Charles asked the question, would love to see what Carl would use as a failsafe, for example, the possibility of some R instead of summary being in one of our records. No worries if that's not part of the presentation. I appreciate that, Charles. So it's not part of the presentation. However, what you can do, we'll do this very, very quickly, is I will come over to match mode. Let's go comma, comma. There we go. There's your answer, Charles. And then also sometimes this. So by default, I did not put a value in here. And by default, it is going to exact match it. But I can also use wildcards and say, find something that looks very similar to this, or contains these three letters, or contains these four letters in sequence. So this gives you a tremendous amount of flexibility when we're dealing with unclean, inconsistent data, which of course many of you are. Okay, Saloni asked the question, can we not use text to column for splitting C? All right, I love that you asked the question. All right, so if I were to come over here and I come over here to column C and I go up to data and I go text to columns and I go delimited next. Now I'm just going to take this over here. Delimiters, if I were to say other and put a dash right here and I go finish, now it's going to create some problems. So actually, let's go. Okay, there you go. So it's going to create a lot of issues over here, but now you can see that it has split many of these up. So Saloni's not wrong. But remember the name of our session today: dynamic modeling, dynamic data, dynamic Excel. So I don't know about you, but I've got a lot of things to do during my day. I've got a lot of data that I work with. I've got a lot of formulas to remember. The less I have to remember to do manually, copying and pasting, text to columns, the better. So, what all of this does again is it allows me to perform a lot of what that text to columns looks like, a lot of what those manual lookups look like, but it lets me do it automatically. It lets me do it dynamically. So, again, next month and next month and next month, it happens in 5 seconds instead of 30 minutes or an hour or days. Okay, now let's come over here to dynamic lists. I think some of you are going to love this. So in these last couple of examples, we have been talking about dynamic formulas, dynamic functionality within dynamic tables. But some of you might say, well, I can't use dynamic tables for everything. How can I use dynamic functionality outside of them? That's what we're going to do here. So on this last worksheet, you can see that it says dynamic lists. And if I put my cursor here, you can see entity codes, fund codes, program codes, and GL count numbers. These should look very, very familiar to you. 0, 1, you've seen this. The 5, fund codes, you've seen this. Program codes and GL codes, you've seen this. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm not copying and pasting, not doing it the way that I've done here. Here, I'm actually dynamically capturing what exists within my GL parsed. So, what does this mean? Let us very quickly go like this. Table GL parsed entity code. What is this going to do? It's going to take a look at the table that we've just been looking at. It's going to look at the header that says entity code of the 011001. I'm sorry, 01020102. But when I hit enter, take a look at what's happening. It wants to spill all of that column. But type it into your chat window. Why am I having issues here? What's it trying to do and why can't it spill it? Because I've got data down below. It's trying to spill it, but I have something here. It's crashing into the bottom, right? But what we get to do is we get to put a unique in front. And before I start finishing this up, I'm going to explain to you what this does. Unique came out in the year 2020. Microsoft did a huge push into what they call dynamic array functions, and that's a lot of what we're talking about today. And Unique was perhaps one of the best ones that came out. And what Unique does is it says, let's take a look at a range of data, columns, rows. And I can return each distinct item one time, or I can return every item that appears only once. I often select this one. And when I do it, I want you to think about what this is going to do. It's going to say, let's take a look at all of those values, the 0102, 0201. And it's going to say, but I'm just going to list two of them. Even though they appear many, many times, I'm only going to list each unique one. When I hit enter, there you go. You also saw that I put a sort in the front. And it's kind of a moot point in this example, right? Because one comes before two. But what sort does is if I had a bunch of codes where it goes 02, 04, 01, 07, 06, it's going to sort them in ascending order. Now, let's see if this in fact works the way that I think it's going to. I'm going to come over here to GL parsed, and I'm going to come over here and just for a moment, I'm going to override this one, and I'm going to call 09. Okay? Actually, no, let's not do it there. Let's do it over here. Okay? So I'm going to make this 09. Take a look at what just happened. Over here, this is my account clean. Beautiful. 09. Over here, it says entity name pound NA. Why is it giving me a pound NA? If I come over here to my mappings, there is no 09. So let me come over here. Let's go 09. Let's come over here and I'll call this Chicago, where I am. When we come back over here to parsed, take a look at what now happens. So I keep this master registry to make sure that as my data comes in, this comes in here as well. All right, now let's come over here to the dynamic list. What do we think we're going to see? No problem. There is 01, there is 02, there is 09. So what's remarkable about dynamic data tables, remarkable about mapping, remarkable about dynamic arrays is we get an instantaneously current data set listing that I don't have to remember to copy and paste. Save version 1, version 2, version 3. Everyone, it happens automatically. All right, let's come back. Let's get out of here. Let's put this back to 2 so I don't confuse myself. All right, over here to the right, what do you see? Same technique. Instead of it being entity code, this is saying, let's take a look at the fun code. Let's take a look over here, the program code. Let's take a look over here, the GL code. So I get this master listing that is not from the mapping. It's actually from the GL. Now I'm going to ask you a really important question here. Have any of you ever been working in your data, counting system Excel, and new entities come in, new fund codes come in, new program codes come in, new GL chart of accounts change. Customers come in, customers go away, vendors come in, vendors go away. Yes or no? Type it into the Q&A, please. Margot says yes. Margarita says yes. Mina says always. Vanessa says yes. Gabe says yes. Angelia says yes. Rick says yes. All of you are saying yes, right? So, what do we do to make sure that we know which accounts have come in or maybe which ones have not? Over here, you can see that I have reconciliation to mapping tables. Over here, this is from my actual GL. Apples to apples in terms of my categories, but possibly not apples to apples when it comes to the data itself. Allow me to come over here. I'm going to go equals TBL entities code. So this is tying, remember, this is to the mapping. This here is from the GL. Do they align? Yes, they do. Let's come over here to fund codes. Do they align? Looks like it so far. Do these align? Looks like it so far. Although this is actually a really good teaching moment. When I take a look at these, I've got 5 of them. When I take a look over here, I've got 5 of them. But this is admin, this is meant. Why? Because I'm sorting these. I'm not sorting those. So if I were to make this really clean, I could go sort. Let's close this up. And now it looks like we have perfect apples to apples. The last piece, let's come over here and go equals. There we go. Okay, so it looks like everything is aligned. But let's come up with an exception. And how would we monitor? How would we be alerted to the exception? If I come over here, let's go GL parsed, and I say, let's come up with a new program. Okay, so I'm going to call this, let's go PROGR. Okay, excuse me. When I come over here, PROGR, if I scroll to the right, you're already seeing I have some lookup issues. So this is a little bit of a flag, but everyone, and I'm sure all of you are very busy people. You don't want to have to scroll through almost 1,300 lines of data and say, let me find the errors. But let's come over here. Over here to the right, this is my mapping. Over here to my left, this is my dynamic GL listing. Now, you can see right here it appeared. Over here it did not appear. And I would never ask any of you to eyeball and say, where do I have problems? Where do I not? So this is what I would do. If I were to, let's move this over slightly to the right. And I'm going to come over here and I'll just go program codes check. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say equals X match. Now, some of you have been posting into the chat window, why not use index match? Why not use index match? And some of you, if you've come through my programs before, you know that I like to use X match. X match came out in 2020. Match allows us to find the location of something that we're looking for. But X match takes it several steps further and allows me to find what I'm looking for in different directions, top to bottom, bottom to top, left to right, right to left. I can use wildcards and so on. But what I'm going to do, some of you are going to be mesmerized by this possibility, is I'm going to put this over at D8. I'm going to lock that. Where do I want to look this up? I want to look it up from n, and I'm just going to do a little bit of a shortcut for now. And then again, exact match. But the difference between X match and regular match is I can do wildcards, I can do regex. It's pretty neat stuff. Now, when I hit enter, let's center this so it's easy for you to see. The characters admin are found over here. Admin, it's in row number one. If I, let me lock this. If I copy and paste this down, oops, let's go like this. Copy and paste it down. It's finding FNDRS over here, FNDRS in row two. But here's the problem. And I'm going to bring attention back to a question that was asked earlier about text to columns. Text to columns works, but dynamic text splitting is easier and it's automated. What I'm doing right here, it works, but it's manual. And Daniel would have to copy and paste this, not just across these 5 or 6 instances. Daniel would have to do this across everything. And not just one time, he'd have to do this every week or every month. Is there a better way? Allow me to introduce you to dynamic array spills. If I put my cursor here, I'm saying look at D8 and D8 only. Look it up within N8 to N12 only. But watch what I'm going to do. Instead of tying it to D8, I'm going to tie it to D8 pound. And I'm going to lock that. Type it into your chat window or your Q&A. What on earth is this? What's it doing? Why is it doing this? What do you think? My guess is most of you, probably 90% of you, have never seen anything like this before. What this is allowing me to do is it's saying point to the top of this dynamically spilled array and go as far as this array goes. So what does that mean, as far as this array goes? This is coming from the GL. So if next month Peter brings in new data and it's 5,000 lines long and I have 7 new program codes, guess what? This will automatically update itself. This lookup will automatically look at all of them. Now, that's not all. Remember that this right here, I'm saying N8 to N12. This is a fixed range. If I ever go down to row 13, 14, and beyond, I'm stuck. It's not going to work. So what I would want to do is I would want to go like this. Remember, this is also dynamic. It's tied to a dynamic range. Okay? All right. So what's it going to do? If I hit enter, look, let's sort this. Or let's format in the center so it's easy for you to see. So it's finding admin, it exists over here. Founders, it's over here. Intern, it's over here. Mentorship, it's over here. Program, it's not over here. Summary, it's over here. So what am I doing? I want to be able to monitor changes as they're taking place. And then, of course, if I wanted to, instead of saying it's in row 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, could I do an X lookup to say, find this? Yes. And over here again, you can see it's program and program doesn't exist. If I can take a very quick aside, several years ago, I was doing fractional CFO work and FP&A advisory work for a pretty sizable company. The director of FP&A brought me in and said, "Look, my biggest issue is the accounting team keeps changing codes and account names and line items on our back end data, and by the time it comes over to the FP&A team, I don't know whether things have been added, changed, or taken away." And I remember when I spoke to the director, he said, "Carl, this is going to probably be about a week and a half long. You're going to get it in a week and a half." Everyone, I was there for about 5 months. And the reason why is because the process was so broken. There was no notification taking place, and there was no end-to-end process from what does the data look like? What's the accounting team doing? How's it getting into Excel? How are we tuning it up? And how are we working with it? As you can see, this is a wonderful way to be able to do this. Okay, let's come back into the Q&A. Let's see what else we've got. Nada asked the question, why didn't the fun code in C12, so right over here, drop to 13 to be with the program code over here? Well, what I've done is I'm intentionally having these identify where each one of these are located. But if I had added PROGR, what it's doing, Netta, is it's going into all of my data and it's saying, well, I found admin first among the list. Then I found FNDRS second among the list. Then I found this one. 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 I'm sorting it, right? If I didn't sort it, now you can see that this order changes, right? PROGR seems to be staying in the same row 12 just because of how it's appearing. So that NA is staying exactly in the same place, but these numbers are constantly shifting based upon where this appears. Okay, so let us come over to our slides one more time, and I'm going to ask you a polling question. Based upon what we've covered so far, we've talked about dynamic data, we've talked about dynamic arrays, we've talked about dynamic formulas and functions. Which of the following best describes what a dynamic financial model is? A model that's rebuilt from scratch each period, a model where outputs automatically update when inputs or assumptions change, a model that only uses historical data, or a model that requires manual formatting after each update. Hopefully, this should be a pretty easy one. But really, the main purpose of me posting this anyway is to reinforce this concept. I think I made it too easy for you. Okay. Take a few more seconds. All right, as most of you are highlighting here, let's end the poll. And let's share the results, of course. So 98% of you said it's a model where outputs automatically update when inputs or assumptions change. Now, some of you did answer a model that only uses historical data. That could be the case if that's the setup that you have. But I would reinforce and impress upon you that these are more seamless, easy to update, super, if I might say even like hyper flexible kinds of models. All right, now let's come back over here for just a moment. Let's come back over here to the GL export. At the very beginning of our session, I asked you, well, how are you getting your data in here in the first place? And many of you would say, well, semi-automated, semi-manual. There is a very important topic that I'm going to introduce you to as it relates to part two of our session. And that is the use of Power Query, an add-in to Excel, as well as the incorporation of Power Query with dynamic arrays. So do allow me to come over to part two of our program. And I'm going to introduce you to this very, very simple data set. Here you can see that I have traditional dates. I have dates here. I also have some wholesale data. I also have some business and individual data. Okay, now I'm going to have a little bit of fun and introduce you to some new formulas and functions. If we take a look right here, traditional date, I'm using something called EO months as well as columns. Now, if we come over here, EO month, type it into your chat window or into your Q&A. What does EO month do? I'm kind of giving away with the syntax. It says a start date and then months, either current month, future month, prior month. What do you think it is? Mirakita says returns the end of the month. D says end of the month, right? Kind of gives it away. EO month, end of month. So if we take a look, it says, let's take a look at C2. Right now it says September 1st, 2017. So several years ago. And then number of months, if this is a positive number, it's going to go months into the future, end of the month into the future. If it's a negative number, it's going to go end of the month historically. Or if I put a zero, it's actually going to give me the end of the current month. Columns. What does columns do? Is it counts the number of columns between a start point and an end point. So I'm calculating the column C6 locked to C6 unlocked. Well, how many columns are calculated there? It's one. but I am taking that one and I'm minusing one. So this argument right here is 0. When I hit enter, this is taking me to the end of the current month. Right now, this says 9/1. If I wanted to have this be, let's say, 9/15, nothing changes. It's just going to the end of this given month. But why am I using the columns at all? Well, this is C6 to D6 to E6 to F6 to G6. I'm counting the number of columns from here to here to here to here to here. So it's going from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, and it's advancing my months. Okay? So this is a nice technique that I've been using for years to make sure that my dates are advancing in the way that I want. But you're also going to note that I have a dynamic date. And just very quickly, I'm going to introduce you to a handful of other functions. Sequence. In addition to unique, which I shared with you before, sequence allows me to create a dynamic array that is a certain number of rows, a certain number of columns, starts at a certain value, and increases or decreases by a value. So in this example, I'm saying I want it to be one row. Columns, I want it to be 6 columns wide. I want it to start at the number 1, and I want it to increase by 1 each time. When I hit enter, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, as you would expect. Something to be aware of, and many of you have seen this in my model so far, and again, many of you have come through other sessions of mine. I've enforced this, is black font, gray font, gray, 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 black. What's happening here? In C8, this is where the formula is intentionally inserted. But because it's dynamic and spills automatically, this is the spill as a result of the formula that is here. Okay. Now, this is a little bit more complicated, so I'm not going to go so deep into it, but I do want to explain what I'm doing. I'm saying let's take a look at C2. Take a look here. Let's take a look at C2. Let's take a look again here at September. I want to extract the year. I want to extract the month. And then for my day, I'm putting 0, the end of the month. The date syntax is year, month, day. So I'm, in essence, constructing a year, month, and day using the date function. When I hit enter, black font, gray font, gray font, gray font, black font. This and this is exactly the same result. But type it into your Q&A or your chat window. Why would I use the one on the bottom, the one on row 9, instead of the one in row 6? What's the benefit of doing so? Margot says because it will spill. Mina says because it will automatically update. Ruby says because it will update, and so on. That's right. So if I were to come over here, you can see that I'm saying minimum data file brackets order date. Now, everyone, you should know this syntax by now, right? This is a dynamic table. This is a header, and it's grabbing all of the dates underneath this header. How do I find out what data file is? Let's come over here. Let's find data file. It's right now on the data file worksheet. So if I come over here and I say, here is the order date, there you go. This is coming in from my backend data. So every time that Margot and Denise bring in new data, dynamic table, dynamic table, dynamic table, and these dates. I'm taking the minimum date. This one is hard coded, right? So I'm manually putting in February. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, I'm going to come over here, and instead of this saying min, I'm going to say max. Before I hit enter, what do you think is going to happen? These two formulas are going to look at Charles's data, and it's going to say Charles's earliest date is this, his most recent data is this. Calculate the number of months that are here and spill it. So as you can see, with EL month, the way that we've been doing this for years, it's a great function. Yes, we can copy and paste this over here to the right. There's nothing wrong with this. Please understand that I'm not saying there's anything wrong with copying and pasting. But in our world of business modeling, of FP&A, of higher level accounting work, I don't know that it's the best use of your time and your energy and your attention to be making a checklist and writing down every single thing that you must manually do every week or every month. So, what this has allowed me to do is all of these dates spill as far as I need it to go. And if I take this back and I say, let's put this at, again, 228, it automatically comes back. Okay. Last couple of pieces, and then we'll talk a little bit of Power Query to understand how this data comes in, and then we'll get ourselves over to part three of our session. If I come over here, sum ifs. So sum ifs is a function that has been around forever. What it essentially does is it sums values based upon criteria being true, criteria being met. Data file, order total. Data file, order total. Right over here. Here are all the values of my transactions. Data file, order type. Data file, order type. Wholesale and resale. I'm sorry, wholesale and retail. B14 pound. Here's B14. But why am I not just pointing to B14 and then to B15? What is this letting me do? You've also seen this, everyone. I'm putting a unique on front of the order type and I'm saying find all of the different order types. I have two of them. It's a dynamic spill. So the very first part of my formula is saying take a look at the two different types of orders that I have. Find them within that listing of thousands of different orders, wholesale and retail, and sum it together. That's why you see this pound. Okay? Now, again, could you copy and paste? Could you drag and drop? Of course. And there's nothing wrong with it. But between the choice of saying I have to manually copy and paste, I have to manually change my ranges, I have to manually make sure that I'm tying to the right column, I don't think that that's a great use of time. This is going to be a far more seamless and also far less error prone approach. Last piece here, data file end of month C9 pound. If I come over here to data file end of month, take a look at what I have done. Very similar to EO month, as I'm saying, take a look at my order date over here. I want end of September. I want end of October. I want end of November, end of December, and so on from now until forever. And what it's doing is it's saying, let's find that end date within the range of C9 pound, end date, end date, end date, end date, as far as this thing ever needs to go. Okay? So, what's really remarkable about this technique, and most people have no idea that this is even possible, is you get to build the infrastructure of your models, of your data sets, of your forecasts, of your projections, whatever you have, at the beginning to say, where might this thing need to go? What do I want it to be able to do? How do I eliminate the mistakes? How do I minimize the rework? How do I make it so that I don't have to spend so much of my time on data in Excel and I get to spend more time on what is this actually telling me? This is one of the wonderful ways to be able to do this. Okay, now how do we actually get the data in here? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring us over to my folders. And you can see right here that I have a data file. This is just simply a folder, and I have put data inside of here. Okay? So if I may, I'm going to say, let's take only the data that is through July. Okay? So in my model, I only want data that is through July. I'm going to come over here to my sales file, and I'm going to come up here to data, queries, and connections. And when I do in this pane, you can see that I have a whole assortment of different queries. The query, Power Query, is located here in the first third of our data ribbon. And what I can do is I can click 4783. Let's refresh this. 4976. And for good measure, let's refresh this one as well. 4783. If I come back over here to my data analysis, what do we now see has just happened? So most likely what I just had was in my file, I had data through July. I added in data for the month of August. All I did was I click refresh on my queries and it automatically brings that data in. Okay? So when I come back over to my data file and I go down, here is, let's go to order date and I'll open this up. Now you can see this is going through 2019 August. Because I made this very, very dynamic, it automatically updated itself. So I'm not going to go super, super deep into Power Query in our session. There's one more part I want to make sure we get to. But in a lot of my FP&A work, a lot of my financial and business modeling, I'm saying, well, instead of connecting this directly into an API or copy and pasting data, I might use an intermediate step of how do I connect to the data? How do I format it? How do I tee it up? How do I bring it in into a dynamic format that allows me to update it instantaneously? Okay, now before we get into part three, I'm going to revisit the Q&A window. So let's see, this might be from a while ago. So Charles already asked the question. I answered that live. Peter asked the question. Okay, so some of these are from some time ago. I apologize that we might be a little bit delayed. Let's see, we've got a question. Is the GL function to link to your ERP system not easier than doing the OData? So if you have the ability to connect directly into your ERP, I agree. I think that that's the best way to do it. Because you don't have to have these intermediate kinds of steps. But going back to that first poll that I asked of many of you, is you were saying I'm doing this a lot manually, semi-manual, semi-automatically, and you might have disparate systems of data. So it might not be an option to be able to connect directly in. And sometimes we need some kind of an intermediary to bring that data in the way that we want. Anything else? I'll just, again, hit pause for another 30 seconds or so before we get into our next polling question as well as part three. Okay, so not really talking so deep about this, but I do want to ask you the question in FP&A and financial planning and analysis, what might be the primary purpose of driver-based modeling? So rather than saying, let's just copy and paste data in, why might we want to come up with inputs, assumptions to drive the outcomes or outputs within our model? To reduce the number of Excel tabs, to link financial outcomes directly to operational and business drivers, automate the month-end close process, or to replace the need for a budget. Take a few seconds to answer that. And while you are, Charles asked the question into the chat window. Hey, Carl, do you like to use data validation lists for those min-max date filters? I use them quite a bit to offer drop-downs to many users, but I keep feeling like there's something better. No, Charles, I think that that's a great approach. And part of the reason why I think it's a great approach is it limits the ability to break your model, right? So for those two date drop-downs, if I allowed you, Charles, to say, well, I'm just going to pick whatever date that I want, and you pick dates that are not within the model, then you break your model. So data validations can restrict the inputs and assumptions that we have to make sure that our models work within the bounds that we set. All right, well, let us take a look at question number 4 for our poll. As many of you are answering, in FP&A, primary purpose of driver-based modeling is to link financial outcomes directly to operational and business drivers. Yeah, I think that that's clearly one of the most important cases. And then some of you are pointing out to automate the month-end close process. That could certainly help too. So they could both be valid answers, though I might think that the better one would be the second option. Okay, now let us come over to section or part three. And it looks like I have another question from Nada, so let's go through that and then we'll come into part three. Could this apply to data coming from customer service platforms to data like number of tickets, service KPIs, etc.? You bet, absolutely. So as it relates to driver-based forecasting, I would think that for revenue related to, let's say, a performing arts center. So some of you have come through my programs before. I often talk about an opera house that I had done some consulting work with, and the opera house was not, copy and pasting data. It was based upon ticket prices and tickets sold and pledges of contributions of charitable contributions and the likelihood of those pledges coming to fruition, right? So those really became our drivers instead of copying and pasting data. Okay, here is our last file. This is a fun one. I'm going to take us over here to GL actuals. What do we see? This is the same file we had before, right? So this was in part one of our session. This is a dynamic table, of course. So if I scroll to the right, scroll down, dynamic table. Budget, budget versus actual. Okay. Now, when we do budgets, sometimes we get them in a horizontal format, the way that financial statements would be to put together, right? January to December or July to June, depending on when your fiscal year is. And it's maybe up to us to decide how we want to make these calculations. However, what I'm doing here is I am repurposing that kind of horizontal structure into a vertical, but not intentionally vertical. I'm putting it into a dynamic data table, right? Because this is again consistent with what we've been talking about for the last hour and a half is can we build really dynamic, super seamless, easy to update dynamic formulas? Yes. All right. So if we come over here to the budget versus the actual, got a couple of interesting techniques in here. So here you can see account number, account name, budget, actual, variance, variance, favorable, unfavorable, and then severity. And then over here to the right, you can see what seems to be a little bit redundant. It is, but I've done it for a purpose. If I put my cursor here, bunch of hard-coded information, bunch of hard-coded information. Type it into your chat window. What's great about hard-coded inputs? What's terrible about it? Hard-coded inputs. Is this going to be good for us right now and in the future? Or is it really good for us right now? Again, type it into the chat window or into your Q&A. What's good about this? What's not great about this? Margot says, great, won't change, bad, won't update. Perfect answer, right? So again, static is it's a snapshot at this point in time. Great for right now, but next month, next quarter, next year, we're gonna have to manually go through this and update it. All right, now this should look really familiar, everyone. TBL budget, brackets amount. TBL budget, brackets account. B14. Why do I not have a pound here? Because this is not a dynamic array. This is a hard-coded input. It will not spill. So I would have to copy and paste and paste and paste and paste and so on. Is there anything wrong with it? No. But in the spirit of looking to the future, looking for seamless updates and roll forwards where we're not exposed to errors, we might want to think about how can we make this dynamic. All right, so actuals, where is this coming from? Remember, the GL actuals is coming from right over here. But take note of the consistency of format. Some ifs, dynamic, some ifs, dynamic. These are dynamic tables, even though the formulas are not dynamic arrays. Budget to actual. Variance, simple math, simple math, simple math. Variance, simple math, simple math, simple math. Favorable, unfavorable. Now, what I'm doing here is if I say, take a look, if F14 is less than or equal to 0, make it favorable, otherwise make it unfavorable. Little bit concerning the way that this is built. But then let's also take a look at this one. I'm saying let's take a look at G14. Let's take a look at the variance. And I'm creating something what I'm calling green threshold, yellow threshold, maybe red threshold too, but I don't need that here. I've created a name which I have applied to this cell. Okay, how do I create a name? If I just put my cursor here, I'm going to go TEST, enter. This is now named test. This is named green threshold. This is named yellow threshold. So what I'm basically doing is I'm saying create a certain threshold based upon 5%. It's green, so not major materiality. If it goes between 5 and 15, kind of yellow. But if it's greater than 15, make it red. Type into your chat window or into the Q&A, what kind of functionality am I using here to make this actually a red, yellow, and green sign? I'll give you a hint. It is on the ribbon up here. Terrorist says conditional formatting. Absolutely. So I'm coming up here and I'm using icon sets, most likely these shapes here, to create traffic lights of severity. Okay, now over here, if you take a look, there is a little bit of complexity here, a little bit of sophistication. It's why I'm leaving this to the very end. Dynamic array, 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 dynamic array. Every single element of this is 100% dynamic. So going back to the very first response in the chat window from 5 minutes ago, static, 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 great for today. But in the future, this will become a problem. If I put my cursor here and allow me to open this up. All right. So there was a question that came earlier of will we talking about let and lambda. Say hello to let. So let came out, I want to say around 2022 or 2023, maybe even more recent than that. Could be even 2024. This is brand new. Okay. And what's interesting is when people come to me and they say, Carl, you know Excel pretty well. What's your favorite function? It's this one. How many of you type into your chat window or into the Q&A, how many of you ever deal with long, complex formulas, nested if statements, this calculation to this calculation to this calculation? Rochelle says yes. Margot says yes. Dean says yes. Salome says 100% yes. Nick says yes. Everybody's saying yes. Well, wouldn't it be easier for us to break those long nested formulas down into something that's a little bit more readable? Well, that's what we're going to do here. So what let allows us to do is it allows us to name or label individual elements of a formula. So I'm putting let in the beginning, and I myself am labeling the first part of my formula filter array. You can come up with whatever you want. You could call it Carl array. It makes no difference. Okay? So I'm going to go filter array. You probably using Carl array doesn't make any sense. But let's take a look. Filter. I'm going to say let's take a look at all of the account numbers in my account table. And I want to filter it by only expenses. Okay? So rather than take a look at every single line item within my general ledger, I only want to grab the ones that say expense. So as you can see here, all of these accounts here, I don't have anything here that shows revenue. No donations, no program revenue. It's all expense. Now my next piece is I'm labeling something total. Again, I could call this Carl if I wanted to. Can call whatever you want. Let's go total. But interestingly enough, I am assigning the label total expenses, a text string, as the label total. Interesting. Now, the next piece is I'm not labeling anything. I'm actually coming over here and I'm saying, now do a calculation that includes filter array, and total. Total. VStack all of them. Now, I want you to put into your chat window or into the Q&A, what do you think VStack, vertical stack, does? What's it going to do here? Vanessa says, give a list. You're pretty close. Margot says, list all the expense accounts and total at the bottom. There it is. This is the first part of the label. This is the second part of the label. So I'm creating what otherwise would be a very long formula, and I'm saying Instead of having a long formula or two different cells and then connect them together, it's no, let's create a auditable line by line by line, almost like computer code that we can go back into. In addition, what I like to do is, as you're seeing, I am intentionally formatting this in a way that my end user can better understand. Now, if I go like this, you're saying, okay, I've never seen a formula like this before. It's so long. There's a bunch of names and labels. This is confusing to me. I don't know what to do. So, what I often like to do is I put my cursor here, Alt Enter, space, Alt Enter, space, Alt Enter, space, Alt Enter, Enter. So, what this allows all of you to do is to say, oh, this is a lot easier for me to read, although it could be sophisticated, but at least visually, audit-wise, it makes it a whole lot easier to read than long, wrapped, nested lines like so many of you are probably used to seeing. In addition, I intentionally structure it this way to trigger people's brains. This is usually how we're used to seeing Excel, right? We have one line here. But you might take a look and say, wait a second, equals left parentheses. How is this doing anything? I don't see any rest of the formula. Well, the reason why I'm trying to do this is I'm trying to trigger your mind to say, there must be something else here. It's going to force you to put your cursor here, open this up, and say, ah, here's what the rest of the formula is instead of trying to string and string and string. Okay. Every single other piece here is XLOOKUP. We've talked about this. Let, SUMIFS, VStack. We've talked about this. Same thing. SUMIFS, sum, VStack. We've talked about this. Math with a pound. 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 Everyone, all that you see on the left is static. It's all exactly the same as what you see over here. But the problem is, on the left, we are stuck living with this until next month, and we have to go back in, manually update our data, manually reconnect it, manually expand our ranges. Whereas over here to the right, all of this will instantaneously update as I start rolling this thing forward. Okay? Really remarkable stuff. The last piece that I want to take you through is dynamic projections. Here's a P&L budget. Here's a P&L actual. Simple sums, simple values. Simple sums, simple values. This is the way that companies and organizations have been doing this forever. But in the spirit of everything that we've been talking about throughout our program, one of the issues that we have is, well, how do we get this thing to be dynamic? And if I may, I'm going to come back over here to actually, I'm going to come back over here. Let's do one last polling question. Make sure we squeeze this in so we can get our CPE. And I'm going to ask you, which Excel feature will allow a formula to automatically expand its results across multiple cells without manually copying it down? You're going to see this in just another minute. Is it XLOOKUP? Is it conditional formatting? Is it dynamic array formulas? Is it data validation? This one could be a little bit challenging. There might be a little tripwire here. XLOOKUP, conditional formatting, dynamic array formulas, or data validation? So most of you are answering dynamic array formulas, right? That's really the spirit of so much of what we've been talking about today. Some of you are answering XLOOKUP, and XLOOKUP, if we put that pound sign, you may be right. But by itself, XLOOKUP will not be dynamic unless we make a dynamic array out of it. Conditional formatting, not so much. Data validation, interestingly enough, you can make it dynamic, but by default it is not. Let's wait just a little bit more time. 10 more seconds. Okay. Let's end that poll. Let's show the results. And again, most of you answering dynamic array formulas, which would be the best answer. XLOOKUP could be the case if you had those pound spills. Data validation technically could be, but not by default. And then conditional formatting is extremely difficult to make dynamic, unfortunately. All right, now here's the big reveal. Let's come over here to our dynamic projections. I'm going to put my cursor right here. So what I've done here is I have included a technique that you have seen before in this session, right? Date, year, month, and zero. This is my dynamic date range. However, I know some of you are going to get this. H stack, horizontal stack, dynamic date, and a total. What have I done here? Dynamic dates and a total at the very end. Okay? Now, when I put my cursor here, here is a let formula. Oops, let's get out of here. Here is a let formula. Again, I'm triggering you to say, wait a minute, there must be something else here. Let's open this up. Oops. Let's make sure we, oh, hold on a second. There we go. Okay. Let's open this up and let's see what we've got. Dynamic data. It's a sum ifs, a bunch of pound signs, a bunch of bracketed terms. So everyone, what this is doing is it's again saying, let's sum the values within bracketed ranges of a dynamic table within dynamic ranges here. Okay? For the purpose of simplicity and scalability, take a look at every single one of my formulas. If you've been through my sessions before, you know that I am absolutely tied into this idea of build a formula one time, repeat it, 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 repeat it. Okay? So what is taking place here is it's saying let's grab all of the correct values for grant revenue federal for all of these dates as far as these dates go, and then calculate the sum of everything. And everyone, as we scroll down, it's the same formula, the same formula, the same formula, the same formula every single step of the way. Now, before we start showing some magic here, I'm going to put my cursor right here. Some of you have probably never seen anything like this before. As I had promised a little bit earlier, we will talk a little bit about Lambda. Lambda came out just a few years ago and allows us to create user-defined formulas that Excel cannot necessarily build by itself. By call is also a dynamic array formula or function that says I want to do something by a column. I'm going to say, let's take a look from E all the way to Z, and I'm using what I'm calling a dot array. Type into your chat window, how many of you have ever seen a dot array? Probably not, most of you. What this allows us to do is to say, let's go as far as we want to go, but then eliminate any extra space. So similar to what we did with trim on a cell, a dot array does it to an array. It gets rid of the extra space. Now, Lambda says, let us define a label. I've labeled it column. And then I'm going to say, let's sum the column from everything here. 1440, 1440. 1415, 1415. So this is 100% dynamic. But the last piece I want to bring to your attention here, and then I will open up the floor to some residual questions, is if I come over here and you can see I'm going from January to December. Well, what if I only wanted to go January, let's say, through June? Could I do that? Yes, I can. Automatically updates. So while we were doing this through Power Query and saying, find where the data is, I could be sitting in front of Denise, who's my CFO, and Denise says, okay, I know we have 12 months of data, but I really just want to see the first 6 months. No problem. Here we go. I can also go, let's go 731 to 1231, enter, done. What I can also do is have this start, let's say at 331 and go to the next year. What's going to happen? Let's actually take this to March of the next year. What's going to happen? I want to make sure that we've got good date formatting here. Okay. So it rolls. It does everything that we want it to do. It's even including these totals over here on the end. But why am I getting a bunch of zero values here? Because I don't have that data, right? So this is what I call a dynamic rolling financial statement. Budget, forecast, projection, actual. You want it, you got it. It does everything that you want it to do. And you can see that when I build the formulas the right way at the start, I don't have to update this month after month after month. Let's take this back to where we were. One last reveal. Here you can see that this is budget. And I forgot who asked the question, might have been Charles, saying, well, what if we use data validation? Right now, this is saying budget. And it's saying, okay, let's grab all of the data from here. But my actuals are on this worksheet. What do I do? If I go budget, actual, done. So I'm intentionally building my formulas in such a way that I can grab whatever I want. I don't have to create a bunch of extra schedules. But what if you do want to create an extra schedule? Right click, move or copy, create a copy. Let's put it over here. I'll call this one B. I'll call this one A. This is actuals. This is budget. You're done in exactly the same format. You don't have to move your eyeballs at all. And if I wanted to take it one step further, right click, copy it, get your variances. Then you get your budget to actual. Okay, everyone, we've got about 8 minutes or so to the end of our session. We have covered a whole lot. And as Jim has highlighted, you will get the recording of this if you have any questions or want to follow anything else that we have covered. What I also am going to raise is in these last handful of minutes that we have, I am going to take a look at the Q&A for just a moment, and then I'm going to give you a couple of goodies, some things that you're probably going to like. Let's see. So Jason says, can you, hoping you show name manager to define a lambda? Okay. So part of the reason why I'm not going to go to name manager to name a lambda, is that's probably a little bit more abstract than most people are used to seeing. But what we can do with lambda is we can create a self-defined or a user-defined formula, and it might say, enter in total revenue, enter in total expenses into the formula here, and it will calculate exactly the way we want it to without having to put together all kinds of complex formulas. Let's see. Can you show 6 month actual and 6 month budget using the last P&L? Well, if I come over to actual and I say, all right, let's go seven, boom, you're done. That's your actuals. Come over here to budget. Let's go seven, boom, you're done. There's your budget. Okay? So very quickly, very easily, I can flex this in any way that I want. All right, Trevor, excited for the goodies. As I promised, a treat for you. There's two of them. I almost never give away my files. I give away templates, but I don't give away my files. In this case, because of the generosity of Elixo, I will be giving away my files. Part of the reason why I do so is it's one thing to watch me. It's one thing to listen to me. It's one thing to watch the recordings. But if you don't get to roll up your sleeves and practice alongside me, you might say, whoa, there were a lot of things that I like, but I'm not going to be able to do this myself. Now you will. Get the recording, take my files, make them your own. In addition, I almost never do this either. So some people ask, what kind of programs do I do? And I don't often discount them. But again, through the generosity of partnering with Velixo, if you are interested, we have multiple different types of programs that we do. We've got core access, a year worth of recordings, professional access, a year worth of recordings and live, inner circle access, recordings, live, templates, proprietary models, and more. Through Sunday, I will offer 25% off using Velixo25, and you will get 25% off your enrollment. These are 12-month programs. These are some of the premier experiences that you can get where you will understand what I do in FP&A advisory work, fractional CFO work, working with dozens of Fortune 1000 companies, mid-market companies, and entrepreneurial businesses to understand what I do with them and what they do within their FP&A teams and accounting functions. So again, grab your smartphone, take a picture of the QR code or go down to this link, and you are more than welcome to come over here. Okay, and as you can see here, add in Velixo 25, and this will take you to what you want. In the last handful of minutes that we have, oh, I'm sorry, we have one more polling question, don't we? Jim, let's go over to that last polling question. And as we do that last polling question, question number 6, what is the key practice when building financial model in Excel to ensure it remains audible and easy to update? You want to hard code values, use a single tab, separate your inputs, calculations and outputs, or avoid using named ranges. Make sure you do this so you can get your CPE. But again, as you can see here on my screen, here's my contact information. Again, here's the QR code and the link if you're interested in joining us. But in the last handful of minutes that we have, what remaining questions do you have? I'll take one or two more. Thank you, Angelina. Charles, thank you. Well, I appreciate the thanks. I appreciate the graciousness. Thank you, Vanessa. Any more questions? Thank you, Ram. Justin, all right, Justin, you get the last question here. Maybe we'll have time for another one. The dot array. So let's come back over here real quick. The dot array, if I come over here, the reason why I have this is if I come back and I say, let's put this at 1, you can see that this is going where I want it to go. If I get rid of this dot array, look at what it's doing. Is it's going out as far as this array goes. And I get kind of this ugly looking sum formula. I don't want that there. So what the dot array allows me to do is to get this exactly the size, exactly display that I want it to be. Okay, Clint. Clint, great to see you. Marikita, thank you. Thank you, Deborah. Daniel, how do you get the access to the files? Jim will give this out. He will make an announcement and probably share within a follow-up email. Shelly, thank you. Thank you, Nahal. Thank you, Luis. Thank you, Ming Ping. Wonderful, Kevin. Kevin, nice to see you. Wonderful. Okay. So, Jeremy's got a little bit of a carve out question. I'll let Jim answer that probably in another time. But again, with just a couple of minutes to have past the hour, I want to thank all of you for being here and engaging with me. Thank you for using the chat window and the Q&A to interact. And just one last comment that I'd love to add before we wrap it up is think about what you're trying to do with your data. Where are you trying to go? What is the end-to-end process? As I've been highlighting throughout today's session, oftentimes we default to the one way we know how, the static way. There's nothing wrong with it, but it oftentimes causes a lot of fragmentation in process, a lot of vulnerability to errors, and many of you would probably admit when you're inside of Excel is you might ask, is there a better way? And the answer often is yes, there is. The better way is thinking, what are we trying to do before we start rolling up our sleeves and building it? And the reason why I introduce you to so many of these different wonderful, powerful, robust dynamic techniques is for one, many of you have never seen them before. But for the others, and as I often do, is it's all about application and understanding what are the different ways in which we can apply instead of just understanding what the commands and functions and formulas do. So again, that's my time. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate all of your engagement and enthusiasm for this topic. If you have any questions about what we covered today or otherwise, again, here's my email. Thank you so much for being here. Jim, back over to you.
Thank you so much, Carl. Amazing feedback from the audience as we see blowing up the Q&A. Really good session. Everybody enjoyed it. Everyone who is on for the rest of the conference, we have a 30-minute break now. After that 30-minute break, you will dive into our next breakout session. You're going to hear from Rob Kalori, who is the CFO of Westchester Library System. And then after Rob's session, we will go into our breakout tracks. So you will choose which session you want to attend based on the ERP that you're interested in learning about using Velixo with. So, with that, I'm going to put us on our break now. And thank you again, Carl, for everything. And we look forward to the rest of the conference.
Enjoy your break, everyone. Thank you.